Well, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the latest episode of Wait Just an InfoSec. My name is Jason Hodgert, and I work at the SANS Institute. I am joined today by Greg Scheidel. He's a certified SANS instructor with over 30 years' experience in IT security. Greg teaches one of our important courses here, Sec 530, which is titled, I have to look at my notes, Defensible Security Architecture and Engineering, Implementing Zero Trust for the Hybrid Enterprise. And why we brought Greg on today is because Greg has also contributed greatly to a brand new paper that we have released for the market to people better understand zero trust, their path to achieving zero trust, and how to implement it using the technologies that are available today and the skills that are available today. That paper, we'll put a link either on the screen or in the description below, depending on what platform you're watching us on today. The paper is titled Navigating the Path to a State of Zero Trust in 2024. Greg contributed greatly to this and has a wealth of knowledge on how to implement zero trust. Greg, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you, Jason. Glad to be here. Thanks for the opportunity to collaborate on the paper and to be here today.
Excellent. And I'm going to hand it over to you very quickly, very briefly and very quickly. You can start rolling. But zero trust is not necessarily a new concept. We're looking at 15 or so years since it entered into the mainstream idea here. So for those that are either vaguely familiar with what it is or have heard about it, maybe dismissed it in the past, can we start by describing what is zero trust and what does that term mean in 2024? And how can we help organizations, and how should organizations be charting a path towards achieving it?
Okay, so two big chunks there, but let's start with the first one, kind of that level set of here's what zero trust is, right? Because probably the audience today, like you said, not made up of experts or even practitioners. Explaining zero trust in depth is way beyond what we can fit into a 30-minute conversation. There's entire publications about that, like the DISA Zero Trust Reference Architecture, NIST 800-207, the NSA, or the CISA Zero Trust Maturity Model. So let me give you the elevator speech version of zero trust, right? The short version where we run into each other on the elevator. You see me and say, oh, hey, I've been meaning to ask you, what is this whole zero trust thing? And I got 30 seconds before you get off on your floor or exit on your floor. So what I would say is something like zero trust is the granular implementation of the principle of least privilege implemented in a just-in-time and continuous fashion and based on an in-depth understanding of the organization, right? Which includes technical environments, our data, our users, and most importantly, our business. So, kind of three main points there. And that's the super condensed version. And even as that condensed version, it's a lot to take in. If we had a little bit more time, maybe you'd stay in the elevator or we'd meet for lunch later. I would dig in a little bit on each of those points. So let me do that here. The first thing that I said about zero trust is it is the granular implementation of the principle of least privilege. Okay. We have had the principle of least privilege as a concept since 1975 from a paper that was published by a couple of gentlemen, Jerome Salzer and Michael Schroeder. And it just says, don't give anybody or anything more access than it's legitimately needed. So this is a core part of zero trust, but we've had this concept since the mid-70s. And you might say, well, then what do we need zero trust for? We already have this, right? The problem is that historically, a lot of times we don't apply the principle or we don't apply it at a granular level. For example, let's say that you need access to a personnel database because you need everybody's mailing address to send out invitations to the company's end of year holiday party. And I check your credentials, I check with HR, I verify that you're in fact authorized to access the database to read that information. So I grant you access, right? And that sounds like I'm applying the principle of least privilege, except that instead of just granting you access to the names and mailing addresses, I grant you access to the payroll data. And instead of granting you read access, I grant you write access. So I'm not really applying that principle of least privilege as granularly as we probably want it to be, right? So that's the first main point. The second main part of my definition was that zero trust is implemented in a just-in-time and continuous fashion. And what that means is we evaluate every action, every communication request, every application launch, every access request at the moment that the action is attempted, right? Historically, what I might do is say, oh, so Jason's allowed to have access to that personnel database. And let's say that I do, in fact, just give you read access to just the pieces you need, right? But you log in the morning, you turn on your computer, right? When you turn on your computer and you log in, you have checks that are performed to make sure that your computer's endpoint protection and software is running, your antivirus is running, is up to date. The login process includes identifying what groups you're a member of, verifying that you are, or seeing that you're a member of the group that's allowed to read the database, right? And that's kind of the legacy or the historical version of it. But what if you try to access the database later in the day? What if in the middle of the day, we find out that there's a critical vulnerability in our EDR software? What if your assignments change in the middle of the day and you no longer have a valid reason to access the database? Shy of zero trust, those things would get missed, right? And you'd still have access to the database. With zero trust, where we're implementing in a just-in-time and continuous fashion, we're evaluating your request at the moment that it's made. We don't assume that everything from earlier in the day or even an hour ago is still the same. Instead, we make those trust decisions in real time. Right? Makes sense so far? Cool? Okay.
So far, absolutely. You haven't lost me yet. I think this is fantastic.
All right. Excellent. Haven't lost yet. All right. So the third part of the definition that I gave was that zero trust is based on an in-depth understanding of the organization, which includes, I said, the technical environments, our users, our data, and our business. So to expand on that a little bit, that ties to a concept in zero trust, something that we called a zero trust agent. This used to be referred to as a network agent, and we could go back in time and talk about the evolution of zero trust to see why the term has changed. But nowadays we refer to it as a zero trust agent. In zero trust, a zero trust agent is not something that is running on your computer or on your network. Under zero trust, the zero trust agent is a logical construct. It's a concept, right? The zero trust agent is the sum total of all of the data elements that we need to make an informed trust decision. The zero trust agent might include information about your computer, like what OS version you're running, whether patches are installed, whether your AV or EDR is running and up to date. It might include information about you as a user, like what groups you're in, whether you've completed your annual training, what security clearance you have, things like that. Zero trust agent could also include things like the time of day, what network location the request is coming from, whether a given request is normal for you, whether there's anything else unusual going on in the environment. Like maybe we're under threat condition yellow because we have an active incident, or we know that somebody is trying to break in at that moment in time. Anything like that you might look at and go, oh, well, I need to factor that in. I need to take that into account when I make a trust decision. That's part of that zero trust agent. And that goes back to that idea of making trust decisions based on an in-depth understanding of the organization, the environment, and so on. So let's go back to that example of you accessing the personnel database. Let's say that I give you read access to names and mailing addresses, everything else is okay. But what if you attempt that access in the middle of the night when you don't normally work? What if you attempt it from a location that you don't normally work from an unauthorized computer, or even a different computer than you normally access? One of the examples that I often use in class in Sec 530 when we're talking about like remote access into a resource is there is a huge difference between you sitting down at your company issued computer at your home location to access the VDI or VPN or whatever it is, versus you being at the kiosk in the middle of the mall, right? And you're accessing sensitive information. It's like everything else is okay, but that's not cool, right? So we take into account all of the information that we need, all the information that we can in order to make a zero trust decision, right? So that's those three main points that I gave for that definition. Again, just to kind of recap: granular implementation of the principle of least privilege, implemented in a just-in-time and continuous fashion, and based upon an in-depth understanding of the organization. Does that all make sense?
Absolutely. I don't want to take you off track here, but
No, go ahead.
in some of our conversations we've had earlier, based on an in-depth understanding of the organization, you and I have had conversations in the past, and I think something that you believe in is oftentimes a security department can be seen as the department of no. Right? Especially when we're talking about a zero trust situation, like it's almost right in the name. Zero trust almost sounds like no trust sounds like no. But in speaking with you in the past, you've talked about making sure that the security protocols put in place, especially in zero trust, is actually more meant to facilitate the needs of the business and to enable the business to achieve its end goal. So it's not exactly about being the office of no. And I apologize if I took you out of order on things, but if you wanted to touch on that, it'd be great.
No, that's perfectly fine. It's a conversation. And that the idea of the office of no, and you said, especially under zero trust, we don't want to be the office of no. Let me refocus that a little bit. I don't care whether we're talking about zero trust or traditional security architecture and defenses or traditional security operations. It should never be about being the office of no. Look, everybody in the organization, whether you're the security architect and engineer, your security operations, you're the CIO, the CEO, the CFO, the person that comes in the morning and turns the lights on and then you turn them off at the end of the night. Everybody in the organization is there to support the needs of the organization in order to help the organization achieve its goals, its business functions, you might say, or its mission. And if we're not doing that, then we're kind of missing the point, right? And especially when you talk about security, right, which we are, it's important to keep that in mind because, we think of ourselves as security practitioners about keeping the environment safe, right? We're there to, make sure that nothing bad happens. And that's not right, right? It's right, but it's not the full picture. The proper understanding of our role is we're there to enable the business in as secure a fashion as possible, right? And something that's really important about that is that last part of as secure as possible and recognizing that that's not typically as security practitioners, our decision. That's not our call to make. That's the business owners. They decide how much risk is acceptable when you make that balance or what the balance is between usability and security. Our job is to give the business folks good information, good recommendations, good options so that they can make good decisions. And then when they make a decision, then we execute on it. But we very rarely ourselves make that call of, well, how secure should it be? We implement according to the decisions that are given to us, according to the security culture, the policy, the mission, the business functions and requirements.
Excellent. That's exactly what I thought. So next, I was wondering. So this paper that we were talking about earlier was really fantastic, and we're only going to be able to touch on bits and pieces of it here. But one of the things, and it plays a big role in the class you teach as well, SEC 530, is the lifecycle process. About the steps involved. About it's discover, access, it's designing this program. We're going to show that up on the screen here while you walk through this. But could you walk us through this? I know you said before you could probably do about an hour on this diagram, and you probably do quite more of that when you're actually teaching the class. But yeah. I would love for you to dive into that a little bit if you could.
All right, sure. So we'll try to do the condensed version here. The lifecycle model that we have in SEC 530 is our security design or SDLC lifecycle model. Intended to act as kind of a guide for the work that we do as security architects and engineers, right? And it has these four main phases to it. We call it the DARIOM or DARIOM model. You try and express it in a way that rolls off the tongue.
Everyone loves a catchy acronym.
Yeah, everybody loves a catchy acronym. But it's got the four main phases to it: discover and assess, redesign, implement, and operate and monitor, right? And the key points about each one of those phases, the discover and assess is where you start off understanding, kind of tying back to, my initial definition of zero trust, understanding the environment, understanding what are the resources that I have available to me? What are the constraints that I have to deal with? What's the timeline? What's the problem that I'm trying to solve? What's the as is environment in terms of the network and the host and the inventory and the users? What's the culture of the environment, right? And this is a really important part and ties back to what we were just talking about a minute ago. Part of the discover and assess, like the very first part of it really is understand the organization. One of the things that I try to do whenever I go in to support a new organization is I research and I look up, like, what's their vision statement? What's the organization's mission that supports the vision, right? What's their strategic objectives that supports their mission? What are all of the technical capabilities and the business processes and the systems that support their strategic objectives, right? It's a tree. It's actually, this kind of goes to another discipline that you might have run into in the past called requirements management, right? What you do is you decompose. You start at the top with the vision and you decompose down through these different layers: the vision, the mission, strategic objectives, the business capabilities. You finally get down to the technical capabilities supporting the business capabilities or functions. Then you decompose into individual requirements. And the idea here is that, if you're going to design something to meet requirements, you have to have that traceability back up the tree, right? It has to tie to and support something at the other layers. Otherwise, you're just creating shelfware. You're creating a solution looking for a problem. So it really is important as part of that discover and assess to understand that, not just the technical aspects of the environment. But once you get your arms around all that, then the next phase is redesign, right? Part of the discover and assess is understanding the problem that you're trying to solve. The redesign is you come up with options, right? What are the different ways that I can approach this, that I can solve this problem? What are the pros and the cons, or the advantages and disadvantages? In other words, you're trying to perform a little bit of cost benefit or give a cost benefit analysis or information up to the management folks who ultimately make the decision of, yeah, that solution, that's the one we're going to go with, right? And there's more we could talk about there about how you kind of strategically present your options to management. But in the interest of time, let's move on to the implementation. The implementation phase is, of course, that's where you actually implement into operations. The key points that I would always want to make about implementation is that it is a warm handoff from the design or engineering or architecture group over to the operations group. Warm handoff means that both sides should be involved in that process of implementing. You can't just throw something over the fence to operations and go, okay, it's all done. Good luck with that. You have to be an active participant in implementing it. Another key point about implementation is make sure that you're providing good documentation of what it was designed to be, but also how it actually got implemented in operations as part of this implementation phase. Right, there's the axiom of no plan survives contact with the enemy. Well, no design survives intact, implementation in the environment. There's always something that's a little bit different. So you have to make sure to update your documentation of this is what it actually got implemented as. Also, you update to say this is the baseline of how it normally performs when we implement it in operations. When you implement, another final key point there is make sure to verify and validate that it actually does what you expect it to do. And then there is a key difference between those two terms there. When you verify that something is working, that means you push the button and you get the green light and you go, oh, okay, yeah, it's telling me everything is okay. Validate as part of the implementation is you test it. You actually check and say, all right, the green light is on. Is it actually doing what it's supposed to do? Is the traffic passing the way that it's supposed to? Is the application that's supposed to be allowed or blocked, is it being allowed and blocked, and so on? So that's implementation. And then O&M, the final phase of the model, is operations and monitoring. That is, okay, now it's running in operations, but from an SDLC, a security design lifecycle perspective, a key part of that is you're collecting information about how it's operating, right? Is it continuing to do what it's supposed to do? Is there anything that you need to look at, like, oh, it's not quite meeting all the requirements. Let me go through the cycle again and address those, last bit of requirements or things that aren't being worked. What data am I collecting from the device from a security perspective that's feeding to my logging, to my SIM, that I can use for security operations to have what they need in order to make informed decisions about how to respond to things in the environment. So that's the high level, a little bit more than the 10-cent version, maybe the 50-cent version.
Which is fantastic. And you said a couple things in there that's going to make me go off script again, because why not? We're just having fun here. Excuse me. One of the things you mentioned was when you're presenting the design to management, when you're pitching this idea up to senior leadership, step one, and then step two, I know we have that diagram on screen, or it was on screen briefly. You said the final steps of the process. So there's a couple of things in there. We know from seeing it on screen there, it is a circular thing. It's a life cycle, right? There is necessarily not a final step. And married with what we were saying, presenting this to management, in your experience, how does that often go in speaking with the people that you've taught in your class, or people in your professional circle? It's mentioned in the paper that zero trust is not something you install. You don't bolt it on. You don't necessarily achieve it in a way that's a final, oh, we've done it. We've locked the doors. We've put a period on the end of this. It is a constantly evolving thing for any number of reasons. Is that a challenge that you found when you're pitching this to management, or trying to explain it to students and other practitioners, the continuous nature of not necessarily implementing zero trust, but like nurturing and building it along the way continuously?
Yeah. Is it a challenge? I mean, certainly I have conversations around it. Personally, I haven't really found it to be a sticking point where I'm talking to management or I'm talking to practitioners and they're like, oh, I just don't get it. But yeah, you do have to explain it. You do have to make a point of the fact that there is no easy button with zero trust, right? Zero trust is not a product. It's not something that you buy. It's a mindset or an approach. And in practice, the way that we implement zero trust is by applying that mindset, by using our Darium lifecycle model in a ongoing fashion. Like you said, it's a cycle: wash, rinse, repeat, to get closer and closer to zero trust. I mean, look, the reality is that we're almost all of us, with very, very few exceptions, dealing with legacy environments, right? Where we've got an existing infrastructure, software, business functions, security architecture, and very few of us have the ability to go in and say, hey, you know what? Everybody go home for 6 months or for the next year. We're going to fix this. We're going to burn it all to the ground, and we're going to start from scratch and build the perfect architecture, right? We don't have that in reality, again, with very few exceptions. So what we do in practice is we apply that life cycle, we apply that mindset as we are facing new problems and solving them, as we are making changes to the environment. One thing that I always recommend people do if they're in a kind of a security architect or engineering role is build relationships with the operations people, the HR folks, right? Even like your legal department, like the different parts of the organization. As architects and engineers, we have to support everybody's needs. Kind of makes sense for us to understand everybody's needs and have those relationships. And kind of hand in hand with that is on the technical side, we will often have in our organization different boards that are dealing with change. Like you've got a technical review board, a technical architecture board, a change control board, and so on. Get a seat at that table, at all of those different tables, right? Get a seat where even if you're not a voting member, right? Even if they just grudgingly allow you to sit at the end of the table and listen, right? Do that so that as things come up, as things are changing in the environment because of other reasons, not because of things that you're pushing, but just because there's a new business function or a system is being sunsetted and replaced by something else. If you're at the table, you have the opportunity to apply that mindset of zero trust as changes are being made. You can raise your hand and say, hey, that sounds like a really great idea. Can we implement this in this way? Have we thought about this particular security issue? Have we taken into account these principles of zero trust so that we can implement this at its inception in a more secure fashion?
It's all about communication. It's all about learning and understanding. This has been really fantastic. Now we're not quite at time. We're getting close to the amount of time we normally spend on episodes like this. So I've thrown a bunch of questions at you in a completely different order about things that I find important and things that I feel like we want to talk about. But what did I miss? Is there anything? And again, we'll have the link to the paper there. I encourage people to read that. It's a much more in-depth access into parts of Greg's mind that can go into this in a lot more detail. But if there was something that I missed, what did you want to impress upon our viewers today about what they could be doing in 2024 and beyond if they're interested in zero trust and haven't thought about it, or even if they're in the middle of implementing it? What kind of advice would you give, or any other tips that you have that I haven't asked you?
Well, I guess the main thing that I would come back to is kind of riffing a little bit on what we were just speaking about how the fact that it's zero trust is a mindset or an approach, and cautioning about vendors coming in and trying to like sell you their product and say, oh, you want to do zero trust? Here's how you do it. Just buy our product and install it and everything will be great. Yeah, that's not how it works, right? In the wake of, like, going back a few years, SolarWinds Orion was a very well-known, security issue, Colonial Pipeline supply chain issue here in the eastern seaboard of the United States. In the wake of those and a couple of other very high-profile events, I had vendors calling me and emailing me saying, hey, I see based upon our, cold call list that you support this federal agency and this organization. We'd like to sell you our product. It'll solve all your zero trust problems. And I'm like, dude, that's the same product that you talked to me about last week or last month. It's exactly the same thing. All you did was you went out to a website and bought a bunch of zero trust stickers and stuck them on the side of your boxes. And now you're calling me up and telling me it's a zero trust solution. And that's not to say that those products that they're trying to pitch won't help with zero trust, right? It's to say they're not the end all be all. They're not the only thing you need to do. When we implement zero trust, don't fall for or fall into that trap of thinking it's a product that's going to solve the problems. It is, again, that mindset. Kind of related to that idea of the products is, what products do you use to implement zero trust? You don't have to get brand new, fancy, shiny objects, right? When you look at, for example, the DISA guidance or the NSA guidance, it says right in there that zero trust uses tools and technologies that we have had available to us for a long time, just with this zero trust mindset, right? We could go through like the laundry list of all of the different security technologies that you might have in a zero trust environment, and every single one I could point to and say, that existed before zero trust, that existed before zero trust, and so on. So it's just leveraging them with this mindset in mind. There are a few key capabilities or technologies that you do want to have in order to have a mature zero trust implementation. You do need to have good inventory management and monitoring and control, because you need good information to make good decisions. So you have to know what's going on in the environment. So that's one, inventory. You do need to have good identity control and access management. Often, we'll abbreviate that as ICAM. That again ties back to good information makes good decisions. It's just here focused on good information about the user identity, the computer identity, the application identity, and so on. We need to have good security orchestration, automation, and response, or SOAR. In other words, we need to have good automation capabilities. And we need to have good host-based protection. right? Because zero trust says that we have to assume that everything is possibly potentially hostile. Anybody could be attacking us, even on our internal networks at any time. Well, if we buy into that, which we should, that means that the host needs to be able to protect itself, right? So is there a single thing that you can install and say, oh, that'll do zero trust for me? No. Are there some key technologies and capabilities you want to have? Inventory, ICAM, security orchestration and automation, and host-based protection? Yes.
Incredible. I love it. There's so many more things I could talk about now, but maybe we have to do a part two of this later. This has been really great, Greg. It really does zero trust. It sounds very simple in its naming, and then when you get into it, it can seem very complex. But the way you've just really described it there is taking care of a few basic things with technologies that already exist, just making sure of that mindset and making sure that you're serving the needs of the business and communicating. You've really put it in a way that makes someone like me understand it better, which is really good. I thank you for your time. Last thoughts. I know I just asked you about last thoughts, but last thoughts before we wrap it up here.
I hope to see people in the Sec 530 class, but.
Absolutely. You can find Greg at sans.org. He teaches Sec 530. He's consulted on this paper. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this week on Wait Just an InfoSec. And if we ever get around to scheduling that part 2 to talk more about this, we will let everybody on this call know. Excellent. Thanks again, Greg.
All right. Thanks, Jason. Pleasure speaking with you.
You too.